my brain. And it was just, one of those mind-blowing kind of like creative experiences.
You obviously love jazz, but your music took techno route, right? So, I mean, are you 50% jazz and 50% techno?
No, not at all. I'm like 100% everything pretty much, to be honest. I mean, I listen to, you name it. I mean, I listen to just as much reggaeton as I do jazz or, electronic music. And I listen to classical, and I listen to East Asian music. I listen to, all sorts of stuff. I'm kind of a music fiend. Like, I like to take it in any shape, way, or form. I mean, I listen, and I have a son, so I'm listening to a lot of, it's kind of cool. Like, I'm listening to a lot of like new hip hop or rap that I used to, I grew up on. My childhood friend who lived a couple blocks from me, he and his cousin would bring tapes of like Houdini and, Cool G rap and like all these like old, the beginnings of rap music, and I got into it back then. And then, so maybe I haven't listened to quite as much new stuff, but, and a friend of mine, Evan, who's in a band called Rat-a-Tat, does a lot of producing for, he did some songs on the Kanye record, the new one. And my son loves those tracks. And he's like, "Oh, this is your friend who did that." It's just kind of a funny, kind of connecting of generations or something. It's been fun. But yeah, I listen to all of it. I listen to bluegrass, ragtime, you name it.
And I don't think that's uncommon for artists, because there's so much time spent alone in a quiet studio that you want to fill it up, and you can only listen to the same track so many times before you want to move on to something else, right?
Yeah, it's funny. There's some artists who dig music and listen to a lot of it, and then there's a lot of them who get myopic about it, which surprises me.
Mm-hmm.
Like a good friend of mine, Chie Fueke, who I did a podcast with recently, but I've known her since graduate school. She would talk about how she would listen to one song when she's making a show and like put it on loop, and because they want that consistency. So there's artists who do that too, and then there's even artists who don't listen to music, which I don't understand, but sure, there's
Right.
different strokes for different folks. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's some people who go deep and some people who are pretty limited in it.
Okay, so I feel like I've heard some artists talk about how they have to carefully curate what that playlist is, because it can wind up reflecting itself in their work.
Sure.
What do you think about that?
I get it. I mean, there's days where I need that. You know what I mean? Like, if I'm working on something repetitive, I might want something repetitive. Or if there's a certain aesthetic that I'm painting, I want to match it. And then there's other days when I could care less. I can listen to, I don't know, Snoop Dogg and be painting flowers. It doesn't, not that Snoop doesn't like flowers, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't always have to lock in.
I understand he especially loves flower buds.
That's true. That's true. He does like organic growth.
So, all right. So we have a few more left here. What about the pit?
What's the pit? You mean like in graduate school?
That's right.
The pit. It was you know what I learned in the pit? I learned a couple things. That I learned that slaughters are best seen from above, from like one. That's why the gladiator, I think those old gladiator arenas, like the people sat a little higher up. It's a little safer to be up there while the massacre is going. No, I'm just kidding.
It's just like being in the front row at a Gallagher concert, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's better to be in the balcony, let's be honest. No, the pit was, that building was really amazing, I think, and brutal in the same time. And the one thing that I learned outside of the little kind of like, amazing comments that faculty would make and that people would talk about the work is I really understood that at that point when I was in school, that a lot of the talk about the work were the faculty sort of battling out their own ideologies, which in the beginning you think, well, that's BS. Why does it have to be about them and how they feel about what they feel? But then later on, you will understand that that's actually really great to hear, because you're like a fly on the wall while other people are hashing out their interpretations of imagery. And then you understand that different people have a different viewpoint on things, and they bring a different kind of like toolbox, a visual toolbox to what they're doing. So I think that, it seems kind of like rough at first, and then you kind of find the value in it, I think, in the long run. And it wasn't as bad as people make. In hindsight, we dramatize all that stuff. Although there was some, not by me, but there were tears shed, and there were people, I think, who phoned it in, or cashed out after
So
after that experience.
how bad was yours? How brutal was it for you personally when you went through it?
Oh, I was fine with it. I mean, I had a dad who would always give me the business and be tough on me, so this was nothing. But um, I do remember a lot of people just not liking my work, which was kind of tough. But then I had a few people who championed it or who thought it was, productive what I was working on. So I just maybe just clinged on to the good things and didn't focus in on the bad.
So, I have a really good idea of what your work looks like now. Were you making similar work at that point?
Not at all.
What about?
Abstract, like environments that were based off of fractal numerical grids that I drew out on pencil on the canvas before I started painting on top of it.
Kind of sounds like Terry Winters.
More like Julie Meritu meets like early Matthew Ritchie, maybe.
Oh, wow.
It was sort of math. I took a class on fractals.
Again, that sounds like a lot of work.
Well, that was the point. The point was is in blue collar. We'll
right.
Tie this all together. The point was is you may not get this, or it may look like futuristic, and this may not jive with your sort of traditional view of what art should be, but you can't deny that I didn't work my ass off on it. That was what the number grids were all born out of. It was like hard work. Like I wrote, 1 to 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 on the painting before I started. So you can't say that it's not, hard work. Then I went to Skowhegan and I was like, this doesn't matter. That was a defense mechanism. So I just painted trees.
All right. Well, one last one. Japan.
Yeah. I mean, it's like half of my life in a way. I mean, my wife was born in Japan, and she moved here when she was like 6 or 7. I think it was 6 years old. And so our extended family are there, and the culture has been in my, direct family for, over 20 years. And I've shown there for a long time. And I love, even when I was younger, I loved ukiyo-e, Japanese prints, and I've always been drawn to that aesthetic. And yeah, it's a big part of my life, and we entertain the idea of moving there eventually when I get older.
Just have to figure out whether your son wants to take care of you there or in the U.S., right?
Well, taking care of medically, I think it's going to be a much better situation in Japan. Here, it's a little rough,
right?
Like healthcare, but yes, that's hopeful to think that he'll even want to. Yeah, I have a feeling he's just going to go do his own thing.
Right.
Boys, my wife always says that. Like boys, like girls, they come back home, they take care of their family. Boys just go do their thing.
Right. That's funny. So you said you have 2 shows coming up this year. Is that right?
Oh, during the teaching year. So in this past fall, I had a solo show in Japan, speaking of which, at Maho Kubota in Japan, which was, I couldn't go to it, but it was a great show. I mean, it was a great experience of sending that work there and working on it. But yeah, so this is the second in that sense.
Sure. And so what can we expect from the show that's coming up? Is it more of the same, or so is it branching out in any new ways?
I think my work is the way I felt about what I'm doing in it, and change, like the idea of change, is that it's always kind of microscopic. Like I'm always making small changes. It's kind of like the Van Gogh. Like if you look at a retrospective of Van Gogh and you look at the first painting and the last painting, they're so different. But as you walk through and look at all the paintings, there's not like huge jumps or anything wacky. And I think that's the way that I make changes, or that I'm responding to the world. So I'm just, whatever I'm interested in that time, I think of ways to paint that and how I might tweak the paintings to fit what I'm painting. So this work is it's called Escape Plan. It's all loosely related on, living through a pandemic and being shut in, but at the same time, sort of like fantasizing about being in other places as well. So it's a mixture of imagery that's, you know, plain as day, like a COVID testing parking lot or a Pfizer building. And then there's stuff like, you know, Niagara Falls or a flower field or, you know, mountains with like the sun and trees. So it's this combination of the reality and the sort of like idyllic escape from that reality. And then, so the title is a play on that. It's a play of like, you know, we all wanted to escape our apartments during lockdown, but and then there's the reality of an escape plan of thinking of, you know, doomsday, like what happens if this gets really bad. And my work's always had that duality, so I think it kind of locked in.
So for somebody who isn't familiar with your work, how do you, you know, a lot of times when I have artists on the podcast, I usually start with asking them, if you show up at a dinner party and you're seated next to somebody who has no idea what your work looks like, how do you describe it to them?
That's always so hard, right? It's like, what's your music sound like? It's blues. I know, like you can boil it down to, you know, representational imagery that's like semi-flat, but then there's some texture to it, and it's kind of architecturally built up. Like there's like layers that I build up almost like a collage, and you know, and I'm inspired everything from like, you know, Japanese prints to pop paintings to, you know, I don't know, Warner Brothers cartoons to, you know, growing up in Pittsburgh. And yeah, it's hard to verbalize, you know, what it's like.
So, you know, and I think I've heard you talk about this before, and that is, given the internet of images and how we consume images, how people have a misconception about your work when they see it on their screen, because of the flat aesthetic. They just can't see what the work looks like in person in terms of the built-up layers and texture, and you know, it's like having only seen a Mondrian, you know, online and never seeing a Mondrian in person, right?
Right. Yeah. You don't see all those little cracks and the little edges and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, that's always been there. That's even before the internet. If anything, the internet may, like, it maybe exasperates it because so much is shared online and you're not seeing as much in person. But at the same time, you can get details. You can get zoom in. We're back in the day, like a Mondrian, you're either going to the museum and seeing it, or you're seeing like a picture in, you know, 1967 Art in America black and white reproduction. You can't see anything off that either. So, you know, I remember the first time I went to the National Gallery and saw the Barnett Newman Stations of the Cross at the top, and I was like, well, holy, like this is. I didn't think it looked like this in person, you know, and even quote unquote flat stuff, you know, like John Wesley paintings, like you could see the hand in there, or, you know, or Warhol screen prints. Like there's a lot of like stuff in there that you got to see art in person. You know, it's,
I mean,
you can't listen to, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I just think about Rothko, right? You know, all those color field painters, right? I mean, part of the experience is being close enough to the work that it overwhelms you, right?
Definitely. Yeah. And that was the point I was going to make, is like going to see a live show. Like if you go see, you know, Nirvana, you're feeling the chords in your body. Like it's just overwhelming you, you know. And if you listen to it on like your iPhone, it's not going to have the same, I mean, you still can get what it's getting at, but it's not the same visceral experience, you know. It's like going to see a play and then seeing a play done on TV. They both work in a way, but they're totally different.
Artistic influences, I mean, is it all over the place? I mean, I see some Alex Katz in your work. Is that a fair assumption that there's influence there?
Alex Katz, I think, came. I mean, I love Alex Katz's work. I never really look at his work. Okay. Like, you know, there's stuff I look at in the studio, like as I'm working. Okay. You know what I mean? And,
like what?
And I don't think Alex Katz is really there. I mean, it would be anything from, you know, like Alan Darkangelo to you know, Agnes Martin. I look at a lot like a palette, and I look at a lot of sculptured video stuff too. But yeah, I mean, as far as like what I'm doing, like Sheeler and, you know, Warhol, And I look at a lot of Japanese prints like ukiyo-e, and there's
Hmm.
this other genre called jinga, which is like paintings of